So thank you very much. I'm actually going to defer right now to Phil and Adrian to let them go through a few of the slides, and then I'll wrap up at the end of it. But I do want to call out, they've done a tremendous amount of work building a very nice infrastructure this year to help us identify and be able to engage with local and minority companies. So they're going to highlight that work, and then I'll wrap up at the end. So I'll turn that over to Phil and Adrian.
Thank you, Bob. Diana, can we go to the next slide, please? So what we've done here, and just to take one step back, I think some of the challenges that we faced within supply chain, especially coming out of the COVID area with restrictions on supplies and heading into a lot of social unrest, rail strike, and now facing the current situations that we have. This supply chain team still remained focused on the goals at hand and was able to develop a closed loop system that continues to provide the opportunity to the local and diverse communities and focuses on sustainability. So what we had to do in order to get this job done is we had to understand the different steps that had to be accomplished. We had to understand our landscape. We had to look at internal opportunities. We had to align to the right vendors, and I'll get to why that box is in red, because that's been the missing link to this whole loop system, which we actually achieved this year. We had to assure the success of the relationships, and then we had to make sure that everything we did was focused around sustainability. How do we grow these vendors? How do we continue to make them larger in terms of what the relationship could be? So Diana, next slide. So to understand our landscape, the first thing that we needed to do was we had to take a look at our data. We had to categorize that data, and then we had to segment that data. And there was reasons for doing that. The categorization was focused on a lot of our spend services. In order to get that done, we partnered with a local, diverse, women-owned company called Vi Healthcare. We then took that information, which helped categorize the service spend, and we tied it back to the incredible work that our data and analytics team did. The result of that is that we now had data that would help us understand what we could do and what we were doing. We could now segment that data to understand whether it was by service type, see where the services weren't being provided, by vendor type, to see if maybe we had more of a focus on a national vendor than local vendors. And we could look at it by region. Where was there opportunity that we might be able to take advantage of? At the end of the day, we finally understood as an organization what we were doing, who we were doing it, and the results of that. Next thing, we had to identify opportunities. And opportunities just doesn't mean that we have some dollar amount that we want to throw into the market space. We were looking for legitimate needs within inside the organization. These had to be sustainable. So we looked at contract cycles. We looked at expiring agreements. We looked at new needs, such as when we onboarded Trinitas. We looked at the requisitions that were coming through the PeoplesOft system. What were people asking for? And then we had conversations with all of our business owners. This was a collaborative effort. We wanted to make sure that we understood things so that we could capitalize on that. Diana, next slide. To assure the business relationship, we became an anchor member in the Ascend Newark Rutgers University Business Development Program. This was or is a venue that helps the small and local diverse businesses develop their business skills. You always hear how big business has to be able to think like a small business. Well, conversely, we had to make sure that these small business understood what we needed to see from them in order to make sure that this would be a successful relationship. RWJBarnabas Health was the first anchor member to go through the program. We had several successful outcomes from that, which was great. And then we were invited back this month to be one of the subject matter experts to speak on behalf of growing businesses inside this market space with the second cohort. This anchor network has a lot of well-known names involved in there. You have such institutions as Prudential, Panasonic, Horizon, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and of course us. We invested in capital to grow businesses. We bought a knitting machine for our sock shop vendors so that they'd be able to continue to grow for us. We developed specific contracts that were geared towards the local and diverse communities. And we do quarterly business reviews. So this way we can assure that things are moving in the right direction. For the sustainable growth, we tried to develop growth plans with the organizations that we partnered with. These vendors, we looked at ways that we could expand the market share that they had or introducing new product lines to the organization. We also aligned the vendors to third parties, such as our distribution channel. We had to make sure that we didn't grow past the capacity of the vendor. And in order to do that, we tried to make the connections that would take them to the next level. And then as anchor members, we continue to provide recommendations on the successful vendors that we have been dealing with, so they can take the next step and bring other businesses into their business cycle. Diana, next step. So as I said earlier on, the missing link to all of this was, how do we get the right vendors? How do we make sure we're dealing with certified local and diverse vendors within the space? How do we grow the vendor pool so that we have a selection of vendors that we can choose from that are out there? And finally, how do we publicize the opportunities, those legitimate needs that we have throughout the organization? And the answer to that was the RWJBarnabas Health Buy Local Vendor Portal, which was successfully launched this year. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my peer, Adrian, and he will take it from here. Adrian? You're on mute, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. So as Phil mentioned, we had to identify what the need was. And after we identified it, we spend a lot of time with our IT team to come up with a process that would enable the vendors to submit their legitimacy to being a local vendor, certificates for being a minority business, and having us go through that process or go through that paperwork that's submitted and making it available to the end users through the bridge and through PeopleSoft. We have done a lot of work on integrating. So this busy slide that you see, most 95% of it, it's lights out, apart from us reviewing the certificates on step 2, where it's highlighted as missing information. But after that, once we review that the vendor is a minority vendor or a local vendor, we approve it, and it makes it, and the vendor is able for searching in the bridge portal or through our PeopleSoft. On the next slide, I'll be showing you what PeopleSoft looks like, or where you would be able to find these vendors that have submitted their paperwork through the portal. When you log into PeopleSoft, there's a buy local icon that once you click, it will bring you in a search form where you have the ability to search by company name, by address, by city, state, tax ID number if you have one, and also which minority, if you're focusing on a specific, maybe veteran-owned, woman-owned, small emerging business. So all these options would be available in PeopleSoft for you to search and see what the pool of vendors is, so you could include them in a RFI, RFP process. Next slide. Once you click the search button, this is a pretty busy slide, but there's 2 types of vendors that you would be able to see. There's vendors that are bordered in green. Those are vendors that we currently have in PeopleSoft. We have other contracts with these vendors. You could select the vendor and start doing or create a requisition with the vendor, or bring them in the contracting process right away. There's basically been some vetting of that vendor, and we're doing business with these vendors already. And the way to identify them is the last column after you click the search. It says vendor master. So if you do see vendor master on the last column, those are vendors that we currently do business with. And the bottom vendors would be vendors that they went through the portal, submitted their information, their certificates, and these would be vendors that are available for us to select and enable them to go through the RFI, RFP process and ultimately do a contract with these vendors. Once you click on each line on the bottom, PeopleSoft would open up all the details about the vendor if they're not shown on the tables above, and each one has the corresponding color bordered green or orange. Next slide. as we created this portal, we're enabling these vendors in our PeopleSoft environment, and ultimately enabling these vendors for requisitioning or including them into RFI and RFP. We want to make sure that we monitor what the process looks like, how many vendors are available, how many vendors are in different states of maybe us reviewed the document, approved them, made them available, how many vendors have already purchase orders, how much are we spending with some of these vendors that we're already doing business with. So all that information is captured here.
We are looking at a couple of enhancements for next year. So he talked about the RFP and RFI process. What we want to do next year is to have those RFIs and RFPs posted on our website and invite the vendors that we know qualify for those business opportunities to submit any proposals. In addition, anything that does not require an RFP, but there may be a business opportunity, we also want to be able to put those on our website and invite those local vendors to participate as well. So we have more of an active engagement where we reach out to them so that they can see what we have available. So those are the planned enhancements that we're looking at for 2023. Thank you. Bob, I think it's yours.
Yep. Okay. So I just want to thank Phil, Angelo, and Adrian for all the work that was done this year. We do have more coming. The only thing I did want to call out is that the amount of spend that as an organization we have been able to successfully direct to local minority and disadvantaged businesses has been below target. And I think that's one of the things that we want to figure out next year is how do we change that? And I think it's going to be a little bit more of a collaborative effort with the sites. We can build the infrastructure. We can identify the suppliers that meet the criteria. We can make that information available. But it is going to be incumbent upon the entire organization to actually go out, look at the site, identify suppliers that will meet a business need, and then work with us as we go through this process. There's been a lot of work done with contracting and legal to expedite and simplify the contracting cycle specifically for the smaller type vendors. So we've done a lot of infrastructure. I think what we have to work on next year is the execution of that to make sure that we achieve what the ultimate end game is, which is increasing our spend with these groups.